240p. 240p is one of the lowest video resolutions most people have ever used. And if you were online in the early YouTube days, you definitely remember it. This was the era when clicking a video meant waiting, praying, and hoping it wouldn't stop halfway to buffer for the next 5 minutes. At just 320 by 240 pixels, the image is extremely soft. Faces look more like abstract art, fine details are completely gone, and text is only readable if it's huge and right in front of the camera. If you ever played classic games like Sonic the Hedgehog on those heavy beige CRT monitors, you've seen 240p in its natural habitat. Those bulky boxes with the rounded screens and the faint electrical hum, that was the 240p era. The resolution wasn't sharp, but somehow Sonic still looked fast enough to trick your eyes. Back then though, 240p wasn't a bad thing. It was a necessity. Internet connections were slow, data was expensive, and many devices simply couldn't handle higher resolutions. Watching a video in 240p meant it would actually load instead of freezing every few seconds. You weren't watching for quality, you were watching for information. If you could tell who was talking and roughly what was happening, the resolution had done its job. On small screens like early phones or old iPods, 240p looked acceptable enough. But put it on a laptop or a TV, and everything turned into a blocky mess. Edges were jagged, motion looked choppy, and dark scenes became a blurry soup of pixels. Subtitles were especially painful. Half the time you had to guess what the words were supposed to say. Today, 240p mostly exists as an emergency option. It's what YouTube switches to when your internet connection suddenly collapses, or when you're trying to watch something on the weakest signal imaginable. 360p. 360p was the premium option back in the early days of online video. If you clicked the quality button and switched from 240p to 360p, it felt like a flex, even though today it looks rough. At 480 by 360 pixels, the image is still soft, but noticeably clearer than 240p. If you ever played GTA San Andreas on a CRT monitor in the mid-2000s, that's roughly the vibe. You could tell who CJ was, you could see Big Smoke standing next to him, but fine details? Forget about it. Everything had that slightly soft, slightly compressed look that defined an entire generation of gaming and video. This resolution became common on early smartphones, iPods, and budget digital cameras. Devices like old Nokia phones, early Androids, and basic CCTV systems often recorded or streamed in 360p. It was also the go-to YouTube setting when your internet was okay-ish, but not brave enough for HD. The big advantage of 360p was reliability. Videos loaded faster, buffering was less painful, and you didn't need fast internet to watch content smoothly. For a lot of people, this was the sweet spot between unwatchable blur and buffering simulator. That said, 360p still had clear limits. Fine details were missing, edges looked fuzzy, and dark scenes turned into pixel soup. On anything bigger than a phone screen, the flaws became obvious fast. Watching 360p on a laptop already felt stretched. On a TV, it was a crime. 480p. 480p, also known as Standard Definition or SD, was the resolution that finally made online video feel usable instead of experimental. With a resolution of 720 by 480 pixels, this was the early to mid-2000s standard for TVs, DVDs, budget laptops, and gaming consoles like the PlayStation 2. Compared to 360p, 480p felt like a huge upgrade. Faces looked clearer, movement was smoother, and most importantly, text became readable. You could finally watch a video without squinting or guessing what was happening in the background. It still wasn't sharp, but it was good enough that most people stopped complaining. That's why 480p became the default for DVD movies and TV broadcasts. It hit the perfect balance for its time. Decent quality, low storage requirements, and smooth playback on slow internet connections. Back then, saving space mattered, and 480p didn't eat up your hard drive like higher resolutions would. This was the resolution that made movies like Toy Story look incredible on home screens. Watching Woody and Buzz on your DVD player in 480p felt like having a cinema in your living room. Early flat panel TVs started appearing, and suddenly that bulky CRT in the corner looked ancient. 480p was the bridge between the old world and the HD future everyone kept talking about. Of course, 480p wasn't perfect. If you looked closely, edges were still a bit blurry. Fine details disappeared, and larger screens made the flaws obvious. But most people didn't sit inches away from their screens, and honestly, expectations were much lower. 720p HD. 720p, also known as HD, was the first resolution that made people sit back and say, okay, this actually looks good. With 1280 by 720 pixels, it didn't just improve video quality, it raised everyone's standards overnight. Compared to 480p, 720p felt like someone finally wiped the screen with a cloth. Jagged edges started disappearing, motion looked smoother, and faces stopped looking like Minecraft characters. Text, logos, and small details finally had clean shapes instead of blurry guesses. This is why 720p took over in the late 2000s. Early HD TVs, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC monitors all jumped on it. YouTube even slapped an HD label on it, and suddenly everyone wanted 720p, even if their internet connection screamed every time they clicked play. Flat panel TVs from brands like Samsung started filling living rooms, and suddenly everyone's entertainment center looked sleek instead of bulky. Watching a crisp cityscape or nature documentary in 720p on one of those shiny new screens felt futuristic. The picture was smooth, the colors popped, and for the first time, you actually wanted people to see your TV. Another big reason 720p became popular was balance. It looked good without demanding ridiculous internet speeds or massive storage. You could stream it without constant buffering, which was important back when broadband wasn't exactly fast or reliable. Of course, 720p isn't perfect. On larger modern screens, it can look soft, and fine details don't hold up like higher resolutions. Today, it's mostly used on budget devices, older hardware, or when saving data is more important than sharpness. 1080p FHD. 1080p or Full HD is the resolution most of us truly grew up with. With 1920 by 1080 pixels, this is the point where screens stopped looking like pixels and started looking like real images. This was the era of early YouTube in actual HD. Blu-ray movies and consoles like the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 finally showing what next-gen graphics meant. Games suddenly had readable HUDs, sharp character models, and textures that didn't look painted on with a sponge. Watching a movie in 1080p for the first time felt like upgrading your eyes. Nature documentaries became an entirely different experience. Watching sweeping mountain landscapes or crystal clear lakes in 1080p made you feel like you were actually there. Every blade of grass, every ripple in the water, suddenly visible. This was the resolution that made people stop and stare at demo screens in electronics stores. 1080p hit the perfect balance. Text became crisp enough to read comfortably. Faces had detail. Small things like wrinkles in clothing or distant objects in games were finally visible. And the best part? You didn't need a monster PC to run it. GPUs like the GTX 750 Ti, GTX 970, or later the GTX 1060 made 1080p gaming smooth and affordable for millions of people. Quick question, what resolution are you watching this video in right now? Drop it in the comments, and if you're learning something new, hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel. Most streams, esports tournaments, Zoom calls, and videos are still delivered in 1080p today. Even now, when someone says HD, they usually mean 1080p, not 720p. 1440p, QHD. 1440p, also called Quad HD or QHD, comes in at 2560 by 1440 pixels. And this is the resolution where a lot of people had their "oh, wow" moment. Not because 1080p suddenly looked bad, but because once you saw 1440p, it was hard to go back. This resolution really took off in the mid-2010s with PC gaming and productivity monitors. It became popular alongside GPUs like the GTX 1070, GTX 1080 in 2016, and later the RTX 2060 and 3060, which finally made high refresh rate 1440p gaming realistic without destroying your wallet. Gaming monitors from brands like BenQ started advertising 27-inch 2K as the sweet spot, and they were right. Racing games especially benefited. You could finally see the track ahead clearly, spot upcoming turns, and react faster. The combination of 1440p resolution and higher refresh rates turned competitive gaming from playable to actually enjoyable. The biggest difference isn't obvious at first glance. Large objects look similar to 1080p. The magic shows up in small details. Distant enemies in games are easier to spot. Text looks cleaner on bigger screens. Fine lines, shadows, and edges stop looking slightly fuzzy. If you've ever opened the same web page on a 27-inch 1080p monitor and a 27-inch 1440p monitor side by side, the difference hits instantly. 1440p also became a favorite for people who do things on their computer. Video editing timelines feel less cramped. Coding gives you more lines on screen. Spreadsheets stop feeling like keyhole views. It's that more space without going extreme resolution. 4K UHD. 4K, also known as Ultra HD, has a resolution of 3840 by 2160 pixels. That's 4 times the pixel count of 1080p. And this is the point where individual pixels basically give up and disappear. You stop noticing sharpness and start noticing details. Fabric textures, skin pores, tiny text, and background objects you didn't even realize were there. 4K really entered the mainstream around 2014 to 2016, pushed hard by TVs, streaming platforms, and consoles like the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X. Later, GPUs such as the RTX 2080 in 2018 and the RTX 3080 in 2020 finally made 4K gaming feel possible without turning every setting to low. This resolution shines on large screens. On a 27-inch monitor, 4K looks very sharp. On a 55-inch TV, it looks incredible. This is why 4K dominates living rooms, home theaters, and content creation setups. You can sit farther back and still see fine details clearly, which makes movies and shows feel more cinematic. Demo content on 4K displays often features those mesmerizing abstract visuals, flowing gold and blue ribbons, swirling colors that seem almost three-dimensional. It's not random. Those demos are specifically designed to show off what 4K can do. Smooth gradients, micro details, and colors that pop off the screen. When you see one in a store, you understand immediately why people upgrade. 4K is also huge for creative work. Photo editors can zoom less. Video editors can view 4K footage at full resolution while still having room for timelines and tools. It feels professional. But here's the catch. 4K is demanding. Gaming at 4K requires serious GPU power, and many people end up using scaling, which makes everything bigger so text is readable. At that point, you're not always using all those pixels the way you think you are. 8K UHD. 8K has a resolution of 7680 by 4320 pixels. That's 4 times 4K and a wild 16 times 1080p. On paper, it sounds insane. In real life, this is the resolution equivalent of buying a supercar to drive in city traffic. 8K exists mainly for very large screens. Think 75-inch, 85-inch, or massive wall-sized displays in luxury homes, showrooms, and tech demos. On anything smaller, your eyes physically struggle to tell the difference between 4K and 8K, unless your nose is basically touching the screen. 8K TVs started appearing around 2019 to 2020, with companies like Samsung and LG pushing them hard. Samsung's Neo QLED 8K line became the poster child for this resolution. Massive screens with mini LED backlighting that made everything look impossibly detailed. Walk into any premium electronics section and you'll see one running demo footage that makes you question if you're looking at a screen or a window. The technology is genuinely impressive. The problem? Almost no native 8K content exists. Most movies, YouTube videos, games, and streams are still 1080p or 4K. So what does an 8K screen do most of the time? Upscale. Basically, it stretches lower resolution content and politely pretends it's 8K. Gaming at 8K is another reality check. Even flagship GPUs like the RTX 4090 struggle to run modern games at 8K without heavy compromises. You're usually relying on DLSS, reduced settings, or both. At that point, you're flexing specs more than actually using them. Where 8K does make sense is in professional environments, film production, medical imaging, large-scale simulations, and future-proof demo setups. For normal users, though, 8K is more about bragging rights than real benefits. So that's every screen resolution explained, from blurry 240p on old CRT monitors, all the way to Samsung's 8K beasts. If you're ready to buy a monitor or TV and want to skip the endless review rabbit hole, I've got a link in the description to the best-selling displays. It's always updated with current prices, so you're not looking at recommendations from 6 months ago. If this video helped you finally understand all those confusing numbers, Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Here's the thing. You just learned about resolution, but that's only part of what makes a display look good. What about refresh rates? You've probably seen 60 Hz, 120 Hz, 144 Hz, and maybe even 240 Hz thrown around. Most people have no idea what those numbers actually mean, or whether they're worth paying extra for. That's exactly what we're covering next. Every TV refresh rate explained in the simplest way possible. Click the link on screen right now, and I'll see you there.